happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 122 for January the 23rd, 2019. My name is Wes Fryer. I am delighted to come to you tonight from the magnificent Oklahoma City, where we had a really big change of the weather. You'll think when you listen to our introductions, it's a weather show, but really we're not. We left the house at 55 degrees yesterday and came home at a frigid 31. Jason, can you believe it got to be 31 degrees? We almost died. But I am the director of technology at the Cassidy School, and we are here to talk ed tech and news. We took a week off last week, and I'm joined always by Jason Neiffer, Dr. Neiffer, also perhaps going to be trying out for a Duck Dynasty sequel, which I understand they'll be filming in Missoula this summer. And so he still has a little bit more time to grow the beard even further. Jason, it's great to see you tonight.
Great to see you, Wes. And apologies last week, everyone, for our missed show. A variety of factors kind of played into us not being able to bring the current EdTech news to you, but we're glad to be back here this week. I know this is one of my best hours every week, getting a chance to talk tech with Wes. My name is Jason Neiffer, and when I'm not growing my hipster Civil War beard, I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the fabulous University of Montana campus. And I love talking about the weather. Maybe it's because I'm from Montana, but it has been snowing for 4 straight days here. So we have piles of really wet, sloppy snow, and it was up into the upper 30s this afternoon, which means that it's turned into slush. So I have to drive 2 hours early tomorrow morning to be at an 8:45 a.m. legislative hearing at the Montana legislature to talk about my program. So I am looking forward to transversing the roads in lovely western Montana. And before we get to the week's news, let's tell you about what this podcast thing is. This is the EdTech Situation Room. We like to take a look at headlines from across technology journalism and maybe take a look at them from a bit of an educational standpoint. Both Wes and I have extensive backgrounds working in and around schools, and we like to read tech news, but more importantly, we like to think about how this impacts the classroom and what happens in the critical relationship between teacher and student. And so with that in mind, Wes, lots of, beginning of the year is always really interesting because CES is a dominant topic, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which happens the first week of January. Then it becomes a little quieter for a while, and then there starts to be release of new cell phones. That picks up the noise again. But where would you like to start this week, sir?
Actually, you've put some CES stuff in. Why don't we pick up there? Because I think last time we were previewing some, and you know, it's always interesting to see what the futurists and actually the folks that are testing the waters, because a lot of those products may or may not make, you know, the actual consumer shelves. So what stood out for you this year, being an onlooker from afar at CES?
Sure. So Engadget, had a really great article on January 10th that they named their best of CES winners. And there are some really interesting things that I think are worth maybe taking a quick look at if you're interested in the broad consumer electronics landscape. First and foremost, and some of these things, interestingly enough, I didn't hear about as part of the mainstream coverage. And that's part of the problem with CES, is there are so many ridiculous things that happen at CES that sometimes you miss out on the really big announcements that weren't quite as maybe fantastic, but still I think will have a great impact on consumer technology culture. So first and foremost, I did get a chance to read a brief article a couple weeks ago, and there was some additional coverage on it in an Engadget, but there is a really interesting thing called GEMS H from Samsung, which they're advertising, Engadget's advertising the best accessibility tech, but it's basically an assistive wearable that it's like an exoskeleton that can help your gait when you are walking. And I couldn't really, there's apparently a video on YouTube. I did queue it up for later viewing that kind of shows what it has the possibility to do. But one of the reasons why I was super interested in this is that, and it's intended to be a rehabilitative technology, is that I myself struggle with my walking gait. And one of the things that we would never have the opportunity to talk about on a tech podcast is that I kind of walk like a duck, and forever and ever and ever, my feet kind of go like this for our viewers able to watch the video when I walk. And now in my mid 40s, having gone through a couple of one major health crisis in my life, I'm starting to focus on things that I may have not had the energy or the opportunity to focus on before. It's found out that I have some problems with my right hip and leg, and I was really interested in this notion of kind of an exoskeleton that helps decrease the pressure in some parts of a rehabilitating leg, but also help reformulate your gait. And having seen a physical therapist for my awkward walking, I'm really interested now in the notion of that particular design. And I think this, again, what gets really kind of ridiculous about CES is that there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of interesting information about the fantastic, but there's relatively few things that are really practical that I think get that kind of coverage. So I thought that was a pretty interesting product. Let's see, there was a couple of interesting new televisions that I think, televisions are televisions, but the one that probably received the most attention was the roll TVs. The LG OLED TV-R is a rolling television, and we've been promised flexible screens for some time now. That's been something that's been a big part of the screen futuristic look that companies tend to do when it comes to television technology. But LG has released a foldable panel that kind of rolls up into a kind of a box. It looks like a big, huge sound bar that the screen kind of rolls up from. And I don't know if I didn't see if there was any pricing on this particular television, but it is a 4K television from LG, has a 65-inch screen, and it looks really hella cool. Like, it's something that it would be very nice in a futuristic kind of Star Trek-y kind of room. And then I'll just mention one other, and I think we may have mentioned this once or twice in the past of the podcast. The other one that was super interesting, and I have one very practical one that I'll mention, is the Impossible Burger 2 was also released at CES. The Impossible Burger is a completely meatless burger that apparently quite mimics the hamburger experience. I am not a vegetarian, although I will tell you I have I'd say a mixed relationship with meat, which is a ridiculous thing to say now that I said it out loud, but I do have some ethical problems the way animals are treated in the production of meat, particularly in the corporate structure in the United States. And so I'm not wholly against looking at alternatives, but the Impossible Burger 1 was very controversial because a lot of people felt that there were unintended potential health consequences to consuming the Impossible Burger, and it did a lot of interesting science tricks to kind of mimic a juicy meat-like burger in version 1. And apparently version 2 is just ridiculous. Like, it is, you would be hard-pressed to tell a difference between an Impossible Burger 2 and an actual hamburger. And then I'll mention one other quick, more practical product, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts, Wes, about any of the kind of headlines here. The best PC, according to Engadget, was the Dell XPS 13. Every year, Dell gets a lot of love, at least they has in the last couple of years, as they've released more and more really high-end laptops. But the reason why I mentioned the XPS 13, it's a laptop I actually recommend quite a bit to Windows-using friends. It's a beautiful laptop. It's a high amount of industrial design. It's flat. It's got a great battery. If you've picked up one in the last 2 years, it's got USB-C, which is a wonderful charging platform. But the big change this year is they've moved the webcam, which used to be at the lower left-hand side of the screen, back to the top of the screen. And actually, my boss, who uses on my recommendation an XPS 13, used to call the lower left-hand side webcam the jowl cam, because he would get on a call, and for those of you who are able to view, or like, this is the kind of view you would get, right? Like, you'd be on a conference call and you'd see, this, and then so it's, the jowl, or in my case, the Civil War beard cam, and know, you'd have to like look down to do it, and he hates it so much so that we looked around for a long time and found a clippable webcam that you could plug in via USB-C and clip on the top of a screen, so he could take conference calls, which is a big part of the work we do at the Digital Academy. And he'll be happy to know, and I have already told him that I think we're pretty close to his update cycle. It may be time to get rid of the jowl cam for Mr. Career, our executive director. So, Wes, anything stick out from you from the CES show beyond what we talked about a couple of weeks ago?
Well, I really enjoy listening to different TWiT podcasts, and this time of year, you know, you're gonna hear a lot. The Impossible Burger was one of mine as well. I dropped an article in from Forbes on January 11th. I think it's really a sign of the times that a top prize winning product at an consumer electronics show is food, right? And so it's indicating the ways in which technology is coming into biology, and the ways in which it's just, you know, permeating all these different aspects of our lives. I think this new version is soy based. Was the first 1.0 wheat based, or do you remember what it was based? It was a different. Yeah, well, the description here in this Forbes article says that if Impossible Burger 1.0 tasted like an okay Sizzler steak, the 2.0 version is more like a well-massaged Kobe ribeye. So that's a pretty, it's pretty fascinating, right? So I think, you know, jobs of the future, thinking about where our students are going to go, what kinds of things should we be studying and doing. Of course, the intersection of biology and technology is just going to continue to grow and grow. So that was a sign of the times there. I don't have a link to it, but on, oh gosh, what's his name? Padre. He's on a pass from the Vatican.
Oh, Robert
come back a couple of times. Robert, yeah. He was on the latest TWiT. You know, there was a product that kind of reminds me, you know, like of, you know, for diabetes, as far as monitoring blood sugar, and something that's taped to you, but it actually monitors your bladder, and it gives you a readout, you know, of how full it is. And so anyway, thinking about folks that are in care facilities, and thinking about, you know, the ways in which the monitoring of our bodies can hopefully afford us, you know, a greater opportunity for higher levels of care. Just, you know, pretty fascinating. And I think we saw the consolidation, or I don't know if that's the right word, but the Apple Watch really getting, you know, centered on, you know, health, on fitness, on ways in which, you know, biofeedback and being able to have data, you know, your life can be improved, and you can make better choices when you have more data. I think that, you know, all of those are signs. But of course, I think we probably share this each year. Not that we've been doing this that many years, but it's always important not to just be distracted by what is shiny and by what is new. There's a tendency at CES, you know, and in the tech journalism press for that, you know, to be the focus. So, really life changing there? No. But continuing to see the march of, you know, processors and chips, and, you know, the way in which the bar is raised of expectation of what everybody's camera can do. It's going to be pretty interesting to see 5G, you know, get rolled out, and see the kinds of products that it unleashes, because we certainly had a variety of services and products from, you know, Uber, Lyft, ride sharing in general, along with Airbnb and other kinds of products that, you know, really couldn't function without 4G LTE connectivity in urban areas. And so I think that CES, and this is where technology is hand in hand, not only just the devices, but the connectivity, you know, and the maturity of the web, and what it's able to do. I think CES is going to be much more exciting when we have more 5G devices, and we have, you know, that kind of potential. So yeah, exciting. And I don't think I'd put that though on my short list of places I really want to go. I think I'd rather go to Google I/O, or, you know, something else. But it certainly would be an experience, and depending upon what's happening with technology, you know, for a particular year, there are going to be game-changing technologies that emerge. We're still waiting for that to happen with augmented reality, AR. We're still waiting for that to happen with VR, virtual reality. But the maturing of these technologies is kind of a, it's the turtle that's just, it's keeping on going, keeping on going. Maybe that's the wrong analogy. It's a rabbit going really fast. Anyway, it's progressing, and there's large bets that are being made on those technologies. And so I don't think we saw a breakout technology in those areas yet, but we're, certainly seeing the more, this is my last thought, the ubiquity of the smart assistant and just all kinds of things. And evidently Amazon with Madam A, still ahead because of its integrations, but the number of handsets because of Android that, Google is on. I would just be most excited to see Apple Music come to the Google Assistant, but don't think that's going to be happening. But yep. It's pretty interesting to see how normal is changing with that, and it's just much more. Yeah, of course we integrate with the smart assistants.
Right. And then I would make one note. We can move on from the kind of broader CS topic. There's a great article from CNET from January 11th that talks about the kind of winner of CES, Amazon versus Google. And one of the things to remember about CES is that Apple hasn't been at CES, at least not broadly at CES, for a long time. They just don't go to this show. And they used to have other kind of Apple-focused shows they go to, and they're starting to appear a little more at trade shows. They had stopped trade shows completely for a while, preferring their own events that they could kind of control, including their developers conference every year, the Worldwide Developers Conference, and then also their own product launches. But there's a fascinating discussion between a couple of CNET reporters about who won, Amazon or Google, and both the commentators agreed that Google had won based on the announcements they made regarding smart assistants, right? Like that's where it seems to be where all the energy is kind of right now, like who will win the smart assistant war. It's sad and interesting to me that Siri is never mentioned in this, and I think that we could broadly consider Siri not quite dead, but just not something that is really keeping up in the smart assistant arena. And as a reminder, my doctoral dissertation research was about the implementation of Siri in the classroom, and one of the things that I did add some commentary to my dissertation about regarding that particular situation was that I felt as though the abandonment of Siri in my perception by Apple, and I did have a lot of mainstream technology sources that back me up on this, may have led to this being less than a positive or clear experience for kids, because Google and Alexa are kicking I'm sorry for saying Miss A's name there, but the Google platform and the Amazon platform are kicking Siri up and down the voice architecture. So,
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, let me segue, because I'll just
Sure.
drop an article in. We made it. I don't know if we mentioned it, but Apple had a huge ad at CES, plastered over the side of a hotel. And it was that, whatever stays, whatever happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. And so it's a direct dig at, the companies that are based on an economic model called surveillance capitalism. And so that's the segue I'd like to make to our category of links, which, as we've mentioned, you can find on edtechsr.com/links. And the heading is, well, we're talking about these in a couple areas. We have data and privacy, but we've also got a category called technology correction. And that is a term that Jason, coined, a few months ago, which we're seeing as a backlash. Cambridge Analytica and legislation, GDPR, different things like that are elements of that. So the first thing I want to draw people's attention to is a revised page that I have made, and got Jason's blessing, and also taken links that we've shared on the show, which we've titled at this point "Surveillance, Privacy, and Digital Citizenship: The Technology Correction." And so you can find that on edtechsr.com/tech correction. Now, this used to be basically about the surveillance state. And in November of 2016, I shared a TEDx presentation up in Enid, Oklahoma, called, what was it? The digital citizenship in the surveillance state, or something like that. And connecting the dots about what's happening, in terms of technology companies, economic models, the ways that legislation and people are being upset. This particular page basically organizes things in a couple of different categories. And so I put a big category, which I want to talk a little bit about tonight: surveillance capitalism resources. documentaries we've mentioned on the show before, from PBS from October, The Facebook Dilemma. It's a great 2-part series. A couple podcasts. We've talked about Noah Harari and Tristan Harris, and their great interview in Wired in October, talking about how humans get hacked. And then there's a lot of books that touch on it. Then there's surveillance state resources. So documentary films, books, and then there's some Twitter lists, and then some advocacy organizations. What I want to talk a little bit briefly really centers upon a book and a podcast. So the podcast is called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and it's on the Twit Network. It's Triangulation 380, and it's an interview with a woman who is a professor at the Harvard Business School. For 7 years, she's been working on this book. Her name is Shoshana Zuboff. And her book is called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, The Fight for a Human Future at the New Frontier of Power. And this is a fantastic hour-long show which talks about the birth of surveillance capitalism. And, Jason and I make no secret of our love, I think, for Google and for the ways in which Google gives us powerful tools and allows us to do amazing things. But one of the things to recognize that's happened, and while Facebook has had the most egregious violations of user trust and, just, I think, done some pretty unforgivable things that should lead, and hopefully still will lead, to, their CEO Zuckerberg stepping down and to some real consequences for them. Google also, around 2001, I think, is when they're saying, move beyond targeted advertisement, which I think a lot of us kind of say, yeah, that's okay. I'm trading, this free access to Gmail and Google Docs and these things to see some customized ads when I'm outside my education G Suite, right? We're just talking about that at school and how we're going to more clearly communicate that to our parents this next year. Google treats schools and education differently in terms of target advertising and all that thing. So all that stuff as far as harvesting. The point she's making is surveillance capitalism is just gathering, as we've talked about on the show, and we've got some articles, talking about this massive cloud of data about us, and we're voluntarily giving this, but it's not in the same way that a credit report allows us to, look up, what do you got on me? Do you have any mistakes? Can I correct it? It's opaque to us. We're not able to see it. And their goal is hacking our behavior and our brains. And so it's not just on a consumer level where they want to, create a desire for us to, purchase products and go out and spend. It also, transfers over to the political arena. How are we going to vote? Are we going to vote? And it's about predicting behavior. And so with the power of AI, these computer systems, in some ways, perhaps, knowing us even better than we know ourselves as far as their predictive capacity, because the more data points that you can have, GPS and geolocation fits into this, who my friends are and the kinds of things they do and they hang out with, the kinds of things I say I like, and things that I say, emotion, my face, the ways in which, you're able to, with facial recognition, to be able to determine mood and things like that. Wow, it is a really pretty jaw-dropping world, and I think part of our responsibility as educators and citizens, and this is part of the cross-connect over to digital citizenship, is to determine what role advocacy will play in this, and how are we going to either, sit back and watch, or are we going to try and become active, advocates and people who are involved in the political process? Because that's one of the answers that Shoshana Zuboff answers in this. She doesn't see this as a completely fruitless sort of thing. She thinks it's going to take quite a while before, we wake up. But if you look at the Gilded Age and the way in which we had antitrust legislation, I mean, I'll say this and then toss this to you to comment on. So we don't have schema or background knowledge in our heads as human beings, really, to grapple with this and to think about this. Authoritarianism, the rise of Nazism, dictators. I mean, we've got ways to think about that, or a flu virus, a pandemic. But we really don't have the metaphors, the analogies, the headspace around all of this to really, be grappling with it. So I just want to commend that resource to everybody. Point to that resource for you. I don't know. I'm not sure where this is going to be. My wife was asking me last night, how are you going to do a keynote on this somewhere? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe this is a book that needs to be written. I think there's important ways in which this crosses over into media literacy and the ways in which students are media savvy and aware of the ways in which, companies and organizations and also entities, right? Any of us can get on Facebook and start running ads, to try to shape people's ideas and spending habits and whatever that we want to do. So, Jason, your thoughts on the technology correction? Is this really going to be a big deal, or do you think we can kind of like stop talking about this next week?
We're not going to stop talking about it next week. And one of the reasons why is because I think there's a couple factors involved. The first one is that it's not just about things like privacy. I think there are other arenas in which we are now questioning the impact of technology as it's implemented in various contexts and environments. And I'll give you an example of this. There's some disagreement about this, and we can have a debate about this, and smart people can disagree about this. But there's the emerging research that talks about that you're better off handwriting something than typing something in a lecture note system, because you learn less when you are essentially scripting or serving as a scribe in a lecture environment. Now, I've heard criticisms of this research from both neuroscientists and also from people that say, well, lecture sucks anyways. I think that there's a complex debate there we could have about that. But the bottom line is that's a good example where it might actually be to the benefit of learning to shut off laptops or to put lids down during a lecture note-taking environment. I'm not saying that's the only example or even a great example of that, but I think we're starting to come to where it's prolific enough, there's enough going on, classrooms are implementing these technologies at a high enough rate, we can start talking about what's the best way to do this. Are there ways that you can implement that actually diminish learning? And maybe more specific to education, I think there are also ways that we could be having conversations about what does curriculum look like in a technology-dominated world. And I'll give you a really good example of this. I have been in countless discussions. My academic area is social studies. I was a history teacher when I was in the classroom. It is something that I miss dearly because I loved teaching history and government and geography. Wonderful topics. I love discussing things with kids. I like challenging them. I like nudging them to think a little differently about things. I love playing devil's advocate. I loved switching sides in the middle of a discussion just to shake things up a little bit and create intrigue in the classroom. But I've been in discussions with teachers where they say things like, well, we don't really need to teach content anymore because Google exists. And as I have said countless times in our discussions in this podcast, that Google is not information. Google is a tool you use to gather information so you can make judgments about what's right and wrong. It is not the arbiter of what is right and wrong. And every time we treat search as an information retrieval exercise as opposed to a critical thinking exercise, we make a vast mistake in how students can engage with information in our world. Or when we say, you don't need to talk about content, especially factual content, because kids can Google it, that diminishes the fact that there's a whole industry around how to get information to the top of a web page search that may or may not be truthful information. Let's remember that a core of the accusations of social media's ills during the 2016 election was that fake news or completely fabricated facts were perpetuated by bad actors in the discussion and the engagement of electoral discussion process, right? So let's not make the mistake to say that technology means X in regards to classrooms. This is what I think is all broadly part of this technology correction that I think is naturally going to occur, right? And to be honest, I'm in this discussion daily. I run a virtual school. There are people that say things like the future is virtual learning. I do not agree with that that at all. I'm an advocate for my program and an advocate for the opportunities it brings for students, but I do not think that the future of education is distance learning, right?
In other words, that it's exclusively that. You don't think
right, yeah, exactly, right? Like, I think it's one of many options that we can utilize that, to be honest, make things easier, not because they exist, but because they are part of a discussion, right? They're part of an option. They're part of an individualization of the educational process. And for the varieties of kids that can't be in a face-to-face school for a variety of reasons, or want to take more than school can offer them from 8 to 5, my program's amazing. But does that mean tomorrow I think all classes should be online classes? No, I do not believe that. And that's where I think we get in trouble in education. We tend to, I think, fetishize technology a little bit. We tend to be obsessed about it and start thinking it's an all or none proposition. And it's not. Like, it's like with everything, it's complicated, right? We should treat it as such.
So here's 2 quick articles, and then I'll give you the lead into that Washington Post tech backlash I think you put on. Google, huge fine, £50 million. France says paying for GDPR violations. This is Ars Technica on January the 21st. And, as with a lot of different complaints, this may be litigated, in a longer process, and the penalty may be less. But basically, the assertion here is that Google violated 2 provisions of the GDPR, which is, as probably as a listener know, Europe's new privacy law that has some pretty stringent requirements, saying that they did not make its data collection policies easily accessible enough. And secondly, they did not obtain sufficient and specific user consent for ad personalization across each of Google's numerous services, including YouTube, Google Maps, and more. And so one of the things I would connect to our school lens on this, and we were having conversations about this today, is just really making sure we're doing a great job communicating with parents about the issues of privacy, about Google specifically, about what we have turned on, what we have turned off, about what parent rights are, whether you give parents the option as far as opting out, or whether that's just part of your program. One of the things that I know I hope to be able to be a part of doing better next year at school, because I've just heard feedback from parents when our kids move from elementary to middle school, that's when the email gets turned on. We have a Google account for them in 1st grade, but until 5th grade they don't have their email. But there's actually more than that, right? Because you can chat in Google Docs. Until earlier this year, we had Google Hangouts and Hangout chat turned on, and we actually made some adjustments there, and in part of our philosophy, and I think that's a good one for parents at home and schools as well, is giving students greater responsibility and greater freedom, hopefully so right by the time they leave the nest and they're leaving school, they're going to be able to make good decisions independently. I'm not saying we turn off all the filters for 12th graders. We actually don't do that. I don't think that would be a responsible thing to do. But a connection to the classroom with this is, making sure we are communicating clearly around the issues of privacy, around the issues of data collection, and that we're attending as school leaders to these kinds of issues. The other shouted article, which is kind of tangentially related, but part of the issue that regulation and that this possibly poses is the idea of a fractured internet, and an internet in which everyone can't pull up your website because there are requirements that say things have to be hosted over here or data has to be over here. So there was an Ars Technica article on January 21st. Russia tries to force Facebook and Twitter to relocate servers to Russia. One of the dangers that we have right now is that regulators who don't understand the technology and don't maybe even understand the basics of how the internet works may do some fundamental damage to key core principles of how the internet is to work, and so that's a risk. I do think that the backlash is coming, and I do think that we need some regulation. We can't just say, hey, Facebook, can't you guys just behave? They're not going to be able to regulate themselves. You want to speak to that Washington Post backlash askew article? Yeah,
there's a really great article that, I'll leave it to you, listeners, whether or not you agree with this or not. I certainly have some opinions about it. It's called "Is the Tech Backlash Going Askew?" and it's from Larry Downs and Blair Levin. And Len Levin is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Larry Downs is a project director for the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. And basically the broad contention is that the criticism of technology, maybe what Wes and I do call the technology correction, is the wrong way to go about this. And all of the hand-wringing about technology and the demand that governments come in and regulate is the wrong way to go about this. And to be clear, both Wes and I have railed against regulation on this podcast in the past, in part because an uncouth way of regulating would stifle growth and innovation in a way that would probably be pretty damaging broadly to the technology field. And so
maybe break the internet too, right? I mean,
right. That. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, this notion that the government staying out of the way of the internet and getting rid of net neutrality, the first decision, a big decision of the FCC under the Trump administration is a good example of that. That by under regulating the internet, because it's not really over, it's not really under, it's a little bit of both, could have the impact of ultimately hurting the net itself. But their claim is that instead of overreacting, maybe overcorrecting technology, right? Instead, we should just allow the next thing to help fix it. And actually, that inspires a whole category, I think, of discussions about, can technology save us from itself, right? Like, are there things technology can do? And you see this already a little bit. There's every major computer manufacturer now has started putting technologies in their technology to try to answer criticisms. The blue light filters that appear now in most modern mobile devices, the time on screen monitors, iOS and Android both have components now that judge the amount of time you're spending in their apps. Instagram itself, known for being somewhat of an addicting app, now measures and gives you reports the amount of time you spend on screen, warn you when you exceed the amount of time that you yourself have set. The technology might itself be able to create a mechanism to save people from itself. And so fear not, dear tech users, at some point tech will kind of correct itself by providing options to self-regulate. So Wes, do you believe that to be true, or is the answer somewhere in the middle perhaps?
Well, we definitely need to have educated, smart, and moral leaders, right? And I think that the level of knowledge about the internet and how it works and technology, as exhibited by some of the recent hearings that we had and some of the questions that were asked, it just we need to do some work there. I think, and this is interesting, and the woman I mentioned, Shoshana Zuboff, who is the author of Surveillance Capitalism. Yeah, I mean, she's definitely left of center, and she talks about, that we need some regulation, right? And this is fascinating because this is about capitalism, actually. We really don't want capitalism to be completely, like, let's think colonization of the Americas and exploitation of, I don't know, maybe say the island of Hispaniola and Haiti, or, just all kinds of ways that, the environment has been raped, and, we've had a lot of exploitation. I happen to, study Latin America quite a bit in college, and travel there. And anyway, you really don't want capitalism to be completely unleashed, where there are no limits and people can do whatever they want, take whatever they want, exploit whatever they want. I think that what I'm trying to say is regulation has a role, and perhaps, and I was a fan to a degree of Ronald Reagan and some of the things that he had to do, but I certainly don't support this idea, that government is evil, it is the enemy, and that all regulation is just horrific, right? There's plenty of examples of where regulation has run afoul. We've got, cases where monopolies or different, businesses are just kept in place because of regulation and things like that. So I'm not a regulation good guy, but I definitely have come to a point where I do not believe, for instance, Facebook is going to be able to behave well without significant pressure coming from the outside. But I'm going to say that it doesn't have to just be, and it shouldn't just be, in the form of regulation, right? Because we're users, and this is a corporation. And so, corporations are responsive to what large numbers of users do, and to pressure that's brought in the media and things like that. So regulation isn't the only answer, but I also don't think that a complete laissez-faire approach to capitalism in general, or what we have seen and we're living in right now, we're just kind of asleep to it. But the age of surveillance capitalism that we're in today, it will not change if we don't have some concerted group action. And part of what that may lead to is some regulation. But I hope that it's thoughtful, and I hope we're very careful, because if you change some basic things about the internet, you could break it. And we certainly, I don't think, want to see that. But human freedom, it's messy, right? You let people make choices, and oh my gosh, what are they going to do? Look at this crazy stuff. And that's also where we as educational technologists, as teachers, as leaders in school, in our communities, we need to continue to remind people about the powerful, positive, good uses, right? Even of sharing. Hey, what we're doing right now, being able to share ideas, being able to collaborate with Peggy, who's out in Arizona, and, being able to, just have our minds connect with each other and learn. It's phenomenal, right? Like, I would not want to give this up. I don't want to go back to 20 years ago and be my age at that time. I want to be living right now in this moment. And we need to sometimes remind people of that, because there can be so much negativity and amplification of the darkness that, sometimes people are ready to just throw it all out. So,
right. And let me remind our listeners, if you probably already know this, if you followed Wes at all, like Wes is the advocate for playing with media, right? He is the advocate for people should create stuff with media. And one of the ways we could drown out, I think, some of the less than desirable things about these technologies is to participate in them ourselves, right? Like, I'm the first to admit that YouTube has tons of problems, right? And they're banning channels, and they don't want to be giving voices to negative this or that. But at the same time, and I think I've mentioned this a couple of times now on the podcast, I found channels that I love that only have maybe 10, 12,000 subscribers, right? But they're doing interesting things, and they have unique knowledge that I don't have, and they put on compelling stories that are interesting to a mass audience. And I'm sorry, not a mass audience, which is exactly the point, a small, narrow audience, right? The long tails we've described here in the past. So let's remember that as well. And you're certainly not going to hear the two guys hosting the EdTech Situation Room saying, well, time to call it a technology movement and shut her down. Right? Instead, let's work hard to balance this so we don't lose the amazing things that have happened in this technology movement.
Amen, Brother Knifer. Preach it on. That's right. A couple quick little articles. There's a ton of other things to kind of get to, and I'd love to get to some more of these. Just put this one in. ABC News, January 20th. University of Oklahoma sorority kicks out member over racist video. We all need to remind our students and each other that at any moment, any of us can touch an electric fence, via social media and the phones that are in people's, pockets, or, in their purses. There are ridiculous things that happen all over the world, and we just haven't, had an opportunity for those to be shared. And I'm not saying we need to watch, mainstream news media all the time. But there have been some students, painting their faces black, using the N-word, and hey, guess what? Now you're out of your sorority. You're not, kicked out of the University of Oklahoma, but it's a big deal. So, those kinds of social media stories, I don't know. Perhaps kids get tired of those, but I wrote a post actually last week about Facebook and Twitter, and I called it "Why You Should Not Quit Facebook or Twitter." Pointing out that, like, we're not all celebrities, and in fact, that's I think a really good thing. We're not all going to be the victims of trolls. There's really powerful reasons to use these tools, but let's be careful, right? Because if you choose to speak to a particular issue, if you use a particular hashtag, or if you're doing something really inappropriate, there's chances that could be put on Reddit, and suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people could be taking a look at it. So last little quick one that I have is a Forbes article from January 21st. It's called "The End of Apple." And we don't have that many articles, about Apple in this week's show. But there's an incredible graph there showing the stock price of Apple, which has crashed about 35% from its November peak, erasing $446 billion in shareholder value, the biggest wipeout of wealth in a single stock ever. And it's saying it's only the beginning. And so the dirty secret that it's showing, they're talking about are shifts. And so, Apple has sustained its growth model based upon most recently, the increased price of the iPhone. But that's just not really sustainable over time. They're not going to be able to continue raising their prices. Things that have happened in China with respect to, the rise of Huawei and actually the buying of electronics becoming a nationalistic thing over there, and then also just the cost and things like that. So Apple's trying to make a shift. They're trying to switch over to more services. I don't think that the comparison to Nokia that they've got in here is necessarily fair, but I do think it's really dramatic. And so here's the thought also about the classroom. Like, is anybody out there talking about this in your economics class with students? Like, what's happened to the stock price of Apple is a pretty shocking and amazing thing. And it'd be a really good thing to talk about and to grapple with. Because there's a lot of things happening, right? There's things about the Chinese economy slowing, the dependence that they have on different developing markets, et cetera. So, we've said it before. I'm not the sky is falling guy, but there's some big stuff changing with Apple, and it's certainly an important topic to discuss, especially if you're studying economics, if you're helping students understand, let's say, finance markets, the world as it is in terms of our, globally interconnected economy and the ways in which these, companies, because of network effects and other factors, right? The Apples, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts, massive, massive companies that have generated so much wealth. Just because they've been on top, and Apple did, I think, have a market cap of over $1 trillion for a little while, doesn't mean they're necessarily going to stay there forever. And innovation is going to continue to be important. So what will be the next innovative product? Can Apple do that? Absent Steve Jobs, we will see. Jason, are you going to be abandoning all Google products in the next month to just buy your, what's the name of the Google smart speaker that costs so much?
Oh, the Max or something.
Well, Google Max is the Google one, but I'm putting.
Oh, you're talking about the Apple one.
It's like
or
HomePod. Thank you. Yeah.
Actually,
so
they were on Woot.
So incompatible with other things. Like, how can you resist?
And by the way, that was available on Woot last week for a discount price. So the HomePod is dead when Woot is selling the HomePod. So I want to transition a little bit to one of the topics related to this, because I'm really interested in this topic because it's one of the things that I think Apple claims superiority and justifiably claims superiority in. So two interesting things have happened in the last week. First, Google has purchased the assets from, I think was it Swatch? Some famous watch manufacturer, and I'm actually have to bring up the article now. Oh, Fossil was the name of the watch that they purchased all the digital assets, all of the smart watch assets from Fossil Watch, and Fossil was making Android watches, so it's not like they are it's not like they're selling like the watch stuff. They're selling the digital watch stuff, and they wouldn't have had a digital watch division if it wasn't for Google and Android Wear, which is the name of the operating system that Google releases for wearables like that. But a lot of people think that this is a sign to come that Android Wear is going to have an opportunity to kind of refurbish itself as Google maybe decides to make their own watch, kind of like they do with the Pixel Book, the Chromebook that they release, and also the Pixel phones, right? Well, juxtaposition that with the fact that Apple has let folks know, and I think this is part of maybe a conference call or an investor call, but Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, has talked about the fact that apparently the good folks at Apple are now selling more Apple Watch devices than they were selling iPods at the height of the iPod era. And the thing that's interesting about that, of course, is that minus iPods, there would be no Apple computer today. I believe that wholeheartedly. It was the device that brought them back. It ultimately led to the iPhone, which became the world's most popular phone and ushered in the smartphone era. So iPods are super important. And the fact they're selling more Apple Watches than they were selling iPods at the height of their iPod thing is huge, right? But despite that fact, Android Wear can't take off at all, right? Like, I have been a briefly an Android Wear user, and I keep going back to my Fitbit, although interestingly enough, I'm not wearing either of them tonight. The fact that Apple seems to have the number of wearables, and to be honest, every Apple Watch user I know is still wearing their Apple Watch. Zero of the Android Wear users that I know are still wearing their Android Wear watches. And so, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that Apple's going into places that I don't think Android can really go into because of the kind of fractured Android market, right? They make the software and the hardware so they can do things like, put a heartbeat monitor and other kinds of health monitors in the watch, which they can then hook up to interesting services that can do things like predict heart attacks and other interesting pieces. But I was extremely interested in that factoid. And Wes, I think you were talking about at one point, you're still not wearing an Apple Watch, right?
No, in fact, I have a Swatch watch. I got, that was a little, let's celebrate after the dissertation. Interestingly, it's a watch that was never touched by human hands when it was manufactured. It was entirely machine created. So no, I'm analog, but I am definitely very, very interested. Just haven't been in a situation with lots of extra disposable income. So that's a purchase postponed for the future. But I think, it's the number of generations we've gone through, the capability, kind of still holding out for video conferencing over it. That'll happen at some point. But I have made that shift to say I'm just going to stay, in the Apple fold at this point because of our investment as a family and just how easy things are to be able to share media. And that kind of seamless integration. So, but interestingly, I've looked at Fossil watches. It's been a while, but when I was shopping, I was checking those out and seeing what they could do, and definitely interesting to see Google make that move. Excuse me.
Okay, well, I thought it was earlier than this. We're near the top of the hour. Is there any of the topics you want to get in this week, Dr. Fryer?
Do you want to just throw maybe one or two of the data privacy ones in there? You've got a few of them tossed in.
Yeah, there's one I want to point out just because I think it's an interesting intersection of other topics we've talked about tonight. That apparently there is suspicion, although no proof, that the 10-year challenge, which went around Facebook and Instagram over the last week, where people posted a picture of them today and a picture 10 years ago to kind of mark the difference. I would have done so, except that I don't really like what 10 years has done to me, and I'm a much grayer person than I was just a few years ago, and I was looking for a funny joke to post, like some people that are smart Alex like me also did. But there was, I think, a security researcher in Canada that claimed that is actually a hidden plant of a fake a viral challenge that was intended to give Facebook incredible fodder of two photos of the same person to help tweak AI algorithms for facial recognition. Now, let me first say that if Facebook pulled that off, I would almost want to give them a slow clap, because it is the most deviously delicious scheme to try to build a database I have ever seen. So if there is some nerd over at Facebook HQ that can take credit for this, tip of the hat, sir, for really just nailing it, right? Because it was an extraordinary a challenge. But it seems innocuous, right? Seems like it's just good, clean, viral fun, and I tend to believe that's not the case, but it's not out of the realm of possibility for me that someone might have wanted to do that. To do that. So again, be careful, I guess, out there, and remember, even things that seem like they might be, just a a fun thing could actually be something feeding the AI beast. And so, Wes, by the way, what did you look like 10 years ago?
A little narrower, a little skinnier. I appreciate you putting the Krebs on security article in there from January 19th about the $773 million password quote mega breach. Brian Krebs, one of the foremost security journalists online today, points out this was several years old, overblown, and it's, again, kind of an unfortunate Chicken Little situation, right? Because, data breaches are a big deal. I'll be speaking to all of our faculty in my little, 3 minutes or so that I get in our faculty meeting at the end of this month about phishing, right? Because most data breaches are occurring today because of social engineering, because of folks who are clicking on things that they shouldn't. And there are real issues. But anyway, that was a good, let's filter the hype from the fact. Last one, this is actually a Twitter video. My title I've got for it is AI-driven facial recognition attendance in Chinese schools. This is from a Twitter user who focuses on China tech named Matthew Brennan. And I'll just read you the subtitle he's got by this video. So the video is all these students that are coming in and they're having facial recognition technology identify who they are. And so up on the interactive video board in the front of the classroom, their pictures and their names are coming up because they've just walked right into the room. And so he says implications of living in a world of ubiquitous AI-driven facial recognition and computer vision. No possible way to skip class anymore. Class monitoring system clocks you the minute you walk through the door. But of course, what's even more insidious than that, I think, and really a pretty poor use of technology, but this is part of the surveillance state and all the stuff that's happening, are the ways in which those technologies are being used to say, are you paying attention? Do you look like you're distracted? Do you think you need a nudge? I mean, how often until we have electrodes that are hooked up that'll, give us a little jolt and a shock if we're not, sitting up and looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It's rather grim. So we cannot end on such a grim note. We're at the top of the hour. We do Geeks of the Week. I'll go first. Mine I learned today from a student in a computer science class. I had an opportunity to look at a code review, and the website is called Dwitter. See what awesomeness you can create when limited to only 140 characters of JavaScript and a canvas. So if you click on the link that I have there to an example, this is the one that the student's shown. And much in the same way that I love how Scratch will let you remix projects, and it shows you the genealogy of who originally came up with this and then how'd somebody else tweak it and how'd somebody else tweak it. This is a remix of, 888 by user JCZim, I guess. And so anyway, it's just a really cool visualization that involves some higher level math that I don't understand. So anyway, that might be something cool to show to your computer science students, your mathematicians. And it reminds me of the Mandelbrot series, if you've ever played with some of those, where you can, tweak some of the algorithms, but it shows mathematical, visualization of these shapes and patterns that are being created mathematically. So not something I'm going to be actually teaching to explain how it works, but it's something fun to play with and allows you to visualize code in a different way. Jason, what do you have for us this week?
Just a reminder, this Friday is the early bird deadline for the Northwest Council for Computer Education Conference to be held at the end of February in fabulous Seattle, Washington. And I do work with NCCE. It's where I book professional development through. And I just want to point out they're having 3 different summits on day 1 of the conference, including a leadership summit featuring actually returning speaker Eric Scheninger, the former Twitter principal. I can't wait to hear how his shtick has changed since I've last heard him. He's a very popular international speaker talking about ways to kind of modernize your school and to embrace the world of technology to make schools better. And you can go to ncc.org, click on the conference link, find out more about the summits, attend either the full conference or maybe just one of the wonderful summits, including a popular Pacific Northwest event, the Teacher Librarian Summit, which is a very popular event every year. So, Wes, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, unfortunately, in face-to-face, they will not find me at NCCE. So I have had to cancel that because of some work-related situations. And I will use my crystal ball to predict that there may be some dramatic changes in Wes's work environment, coming in a few months. Hopefully, great ones. And they may or not involve moving, but I'm not going to be at NCCE. However, I will be online, and I am on Twitter at wfryer. My blog, speedofcreativity.org, is where I am periodically writing some things. I need to get kicked off again, and I will be on my weekly newsletter and sending out a video and sharing there. So how about yourself, Dr. Neifer? Where can we continue to learn at your feet?
I am on Twitter at Tech Savvy Teach, where I like to tweet out, 10, 15 articles a week of things I'm reading. I like to read a lot in technology, political, and also educational journalism, something that I'm very interested in. I also, again, work with NCC, ncc.org, or the Tech Savvy Teacher blog.ncc.org. And again, this Friday is the early bird deadline for the NCC conference. Come join a really wonderful group of thousands of educators from the Pacific Northwest to talk tech. So Wes, I guess this is a podcast though, right? So where can people find the podcast?
So we have several spots. Anywhere you find finer podcasts, you should be able to find us. Just look for the EdTech Situation Room. Ask your smart assistant to play the latest episode of the EdTech Situation Room. You can find us specifically on edtechsr.com, where you'll find a 32 kilobit audio version as well as a smaller video version that you can download if you're so inclined, or you can always subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, where we're up to 55 some odd subscribers. So we would love to hear from you, love to hear any feedback, particularly the project I mentioned about surveillance capitalism, surveillance state, and digital citizenship. Lots of books that I have not read yet, but just have been kind of collecting. And so anyway, would love any feedback that people have on that, and think that we need to continue not just, reading these articles and enjoying learning, which is great about them, but also thinking about the ways that we may want to become politically involved, either at local, state, or national levels on these kinds of issues. We need people who are informed about technology and can speak into these conversations, because we don't want people that absolutely don't understand the technology, making decisions that could have dramatically negative effects on these powerful tools, which we have at our fingertips. So it has been great to visit with you tonight. We want to invite you back. Thank you, Peggy, for joining us live. If you're able to join us live, normally at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, we are here on YouTube Live. So please, send your snow shovels and your salt bags up to Jason. He will need them. Look for, where the beard will go next. It's just one of the extra treats you get. If you tune in live, you get to see the beard. So until next time, stay safe and stay savvy, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Good night.